And those of us who are still in the room, we have the pleasure of listening to Nancy Praymayer. Nancy, come on up.
All right. Good morning, everyone. I think I'm on. Yes, I'm on. Okay, great. So for some time, I've been wanting to talk to you about how to handle conflict. So when I was asked to speak a couple of weeks ago, I thought, great, this is my opportunity. Because what I've observed is that a lot of people don't know how to handle conflict well. Either they avoid it entirely and the conflict festers and damages relationships, or they plunge into conflict and run over people, leaving them bruised and bleeding in their wake. And as I was listening to Mike speak last week, he shared a scripture in Colossians that just really hit me about living in harmony. And I thought, that's actually the flip side of conflict, isn't it? Is how to live in harmony. So today, I would like to talk about another aspect of freedom that we can experience as we walk in the grace walk. And that is the freedom to live in harmony. So there's lots of scriptures that talk about the Father's heart for us, his expressed desire that we live in harmony. So in Psalm 133, it says, how wonderful it is, how pleasant for God's people to live together in harmony. In the New Testament, it talks about, it almost sounds like a command, live in harmony with one another. And again in Romans, may the God of endurance and encouragement, interesting choice of words there, linked to harmony, grant you to live in such harmony with one another in accord with Christ Jesus. So throughout the scriptures, Old Testament and New Testament, the Father is expressing his desire that we enter into the kind of harmony that he enjoys with Jesus and the Holy Spirit. So a lot of people strive for harmony, and what I've found, and certainly these were true of me, some common perceptions of what harmony actually is. So a lot of people think harmony is thinking the same about everything. If you think the same as the other person that you're in relationship with, well then surely you'll have harmony in that relationship, right? Makes sense? Some people would say that, well, to have harmony, you actually have to repress what you want or what you feel or what you think. Because if you're open about those things, it could cause conflict and disrupt the harmony in the relationship. Harmony, clearly, has to involve thinking of others more than yourself, putting yourself last constantly, doesn't it? And it should include always deferring to what others want and not fighting for or advocating for what you want. And obviously, harmony means never having conflict. At least these were things that I thought harmony meant. Because of my deep insecurities when we got married, and actually for the first 20 years of our marriage, I was petrified that Ernie would leave me if I somehow managed to tick him off enough. And so for those first 20 years, I did all these things. I tried very hard to not create conflict. So I kept back, I held back what I thought, I held back what I felt or what I really wanted, and I had this odd perspective on submission, and so it was basically deferring to whatever he wanted. So if I spoke up about something I wanted and I'd watch his face and there was any hint of displeasure or confusion or not really coming to my side, I just backed off completely. And the irony is, I would tell people, oh yes, we have a very good relationship because we never fight. And we didn't. We rarely had disagreements because I refused to enter into a disagreement. I was that afraid of creating conflict. And When the Father started renovating my thinking about 10 years ago and grounding me in my core identity, I started speaking up more honestly about what was important to me. And we actually ended up having more conflict than we'd had in the first 20 years of marriage. But what we also had that we didn't have was an authentic harmony. So maybe you're relating to some of these things, and I just want you to be open to maybe those aren't the things that you need to create harmony. Maybe there's a different way to create harmony. So let's look at, I'm a word person, so I always want to go back to what the original Greek or Hebrew means. So the Greek word for harmony, when you see the word harmony in the New Testament, is phroneo, and it comes from a root word, phren, which means the midriff or the diaphragm, the middle of you, the parts of the heart or the mind. It doesn't actually say anything about getting along. However, the Greek definition is to have understanding, because it's going back to the mind, to be wise, looking at the parts of the heart, to feel, to think, to have an opinion of oneself. An interesting aspect of harmony, to have an opinion of oneself, to think highly of yourself, to think or judge what one's opinion is. So not to be wishy-washy, not to say, well, I don't know what I think about that, but to actually have an opinion. And yes, to be of the same mind. And this is the classic definition of harmony. Yeah, you got to think the same. To be agreed together and cherish the same views. And I do think that there has to be some foundation to create harmony. But it doesn't mean that you think the same, because this is very clear. Harmony is based on understanding yourself and the other person. In the dictionary, harmony is defined as agreement, accord, peace. Of course, everyone always thinks of harmony as being peace. Amicability, so you're getting along. Friendship, fellowship, cooperation, and there's that understanding word again. Consensus, unity, like-mindedness. And I like the word concert and oneness. So harmony definitely includes agreement. But that doesn't mean you necessarily think the same about everything. In fact, you can agree to disagree and have harmony. But let's focus for a minute on the word concert, because that makes me think of music. When I was younger, I played piano. I went up to grade 8 in piano. And so when I think of concert, I think of music. And so if we look at harmony in music, when you're listening to something that is very harmonious in music, and we see it every Sunday morning, people are singing the same song, and they're singing in the same key. But there are different notes played at the same time, and it creates harmony. So we have a number of very talented musicians who often, one will carry the melody, and one will sing the harmony, and it creates an absolutely beautiful experience. Harmony is defined in music as the combination of simultaneously sounded musical notes to produce chords and chord progressions having a pleasing effect. So simultaneously sounded, but they're different notes. So Sarah, if you could just give an example. We'll just play one note for you. So that's middle C. And imagine if the songs that we sang were just that note, repeated again and again and again, kind of like Jingle Bells. Da, 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 da. Yeah, it's very boring, right? Now, if we add another note to that in the middle, you see how it starts to enrich the sound just by adding another note. It's not the same note, but it's a note that follows some rules within the music world to create a harmonious effect. And now the last one, please. And that's a chord. We've got 3 different notes being played simultaneously to produce a chord having a pleasing effect. And you're saying, what the heck's this got to do with living in harmony? I will explain. But I wanted you to experience it, because if we're all this, if we're all that middle C, that means we're all thinking the same. If we got a few people here and they're the E note, well, now we can start to experience some harmony. But the reality is, we're like different notes making up a chord. We all have different personalities, different values, different life experiences, different opinions, different priorities, different preferences. We're like the C and the E and the G notes, all kind of playing together to create harmony. So harmony is actually not because we're the same. Harmony is possible because we are different. So if you've been thinking that living in harmony requires you to be like the other person, I would ask you to consider that actual true harmony is because you're different, not the same. There's got to be some common ground, and I'll talk in a minute about what that is. But harmony in music is not possible if you don't have different notes playing at the same time. And I would suggest harmony in relationships isn't possible if you don't have any differences. But it's knowing how to handle the differences. Come on. There we go. Now, what typically happens is we allow the differences to create disharmony. And that's usually when we see differences between us and the other person as being good or bad, better or worse. And we allow it to generate conflict. So what happens is if we see a difference between us and another person, it becomes a place of judging. They're either better or worse than us in it. In athletics, if they run faster than us, well, they're better than us because they're different and they're achieving things that we can't achieve. So it becomes a place of judgment. It can become a place of competition, the one-upmanship. Because I don't see that I'm as good as you, I'm going to work hard to be better than you, be it in the corporate success ladder, be it in sports, be it as a mother or father or a friend, whatever it is. If we're seeing differences as being on the scale of good or bad or better or worse, we're going to find ourselves competing to prove something. Seeing differences can also generate conflict when we're holding expectations of people that they would do things the same way we do them, or that they would be the same way that we are, that they have the same priorities. And a lot of times we have expectations of people we don't even realize we do until they disappoint us. And what happens a lot is they don't meet our expectations, we end up being disappointed, and we end up in a place of disharmony. Oops. And when people don't act the way we think they should, the first thing that most of us do is try and figure out why. Why are they acting like that? And we'll go right down to the level of saying, oh, I know why they're doing that. They're just lazy. They're just this. They're just that. We think that we know what's underlying their behaviors. We look at their actions and we say, oh, that's why, without really actually knowing why. So if you think back to the definition of harmony, this is actually not coming from a place of understanding. It's actually coming from a place of judgment. And it creates disharmony because we don't take it any further. We react to that situation based on what we've determined are the motives of that other person. So the differences in that case create disharmony. Or we may take offense. Again, if we've had expectations that have not been met, if we've attributed motives, if we think we know why they're doing something, and obviously it's because they don't like us or they don't want us around or they didn't care about us or they forgot my birthday or whatever, we're going to be offended because we think we know why. And oftentimes it comes down to feeling insecure and inadequate. So when we look at someone, this goes back to the comparison game, and we think we know why they're doing something, and we feel worse than they do, whatever they're doing triggers our insecurities and our inadequacies. So if we're in these kinds of mindsets, then the differences are not going to create harmony. We're going to allow them to create disharmony. And that's often what happens, not only in the world out there, but in the church as well. So what's the basis for real harmony? Because we are all different, and it is clear that we are called to live in harmony. So Colossians says, above all, clothe yourselves with love, which binds everything together in perfect harmony. So that tells me that, okay, harmony comes when you have differences, but if you surround it with love, if you clothe yourselves with love, that is a way to create harmony. Because love actually harmonizes differences between us. So again, keep in mind, our differences, the way that each of us is uniquely created, reflects a facet of God's personality. Okay, each one of us reflects a part of God's nature. And together, when we put our differences together, we create that divine love song. It's not like slamming your hands on the piano and you get a bunch of noise. God knows how to orchestrate our differences to create a divine love song. And love actually reconciles what seems to be opposite. So if you think about the nature of God, the essence of God is love. And in that love, he is reconciling mercy and justice, anger and compassion. As you read through the Bible, there's all kinds of different pictures of God that seem like they're at odds with each other. But because the essence of God is love, he perfectly harmonizes and reconciles all of those opposites. So when we have that God kind of love, differences don't have to divide us. They actually become a cause for celebrating God's nature manifested in us. We can appreciate the differences. We can step back and defer to each other saying, well, you're better at this than I am, so why don't you take care of that? And it becomes a place of harmony in the middle of the differences. So I want to talk for a minute about a concept that probably a number of you will disagree with me on. So I'm going to share my experience. I'm not saying this is the definitive truth. I'm just going to share how this was for me. And that is the concept of loving others as yourself. There's lots of scriptures that talk about, and I'm not going to read them all. You can refer to those yourselves. But to love others as you love yourself. And I would insert the word just as you love yourself to indicate that when God says love others as yourself, he's saying the same way, to the same degree that you love yourself, you should love others. Not more, thinking that they're better than you, and not less, thinking that they're not as good as you. Just as you love yourself. So, when I read that, I don't see it as a command to love others. I see it as a statement of truth. I see it as the level of love that we have for ourselves actually can act as a cap on how much we can love other people. Now, I bet if I asked for a show of hands, probably half of you would go, that's not true. I can love others and not have to love me. Let me give you some examples. First from my life, but so in that place of deep insecurity, I would have said to you, absolutely, I love other people more than me. I don't love myself, I acknowledge that, I think I'm pretty crappy, but I am a very loving person. When I got really honest with myself, what I realized was that yes, I did love other people, but it wasn't quite as pure as I thought it was. And so I would do things for people, because I love them, yes, but so that they would like me, so that they would approve of me, so that I would get their affirmation, so they would think I was a really great person. And so the way that I was expressing love, the foundation and root of the love that I was showing, was not unconditional. Because if then they didn't receive what I was doing for them or giving to them, I would get offended because it was not unconditional. I was looking for something. It was a way of filling my own needs for external affirmation because I wasn't feeling good about me inside. I had to get it from the outside. So my way of showing love to people was not unconditional, it was conditional, and it was measured. Others that I've seen, so, say a mom who is insecure about her house. She never feels like she's organized, and so she's having company, and she's just absolutely going crazy, trying to get her house cleaned up and in order. And her 3- and 5-year-olds come roaring through the house and basically undo everything that she's just done. In that moment, is she going to be showing them love? No. She's out of that insecurity that is causing her to want everything to be perfect, is going to be imposing that same standard on them and will not be acting in a loving way. Now, obviously, if a truck's coming by, her little kid is standing there in the road, she's going to sacrifice herself for them. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about the day-to-day outworking of love when someone doesn't love themselves. So I'm just saying for me, that was my experience. I thought, and I would have told you, I was loving other people well. But if I got really honest, it was coming from a place of need because I wasn't centered and grounded in who I was. So when we accept ourselves as we are and believe we're worthy, when we approve of ourselves and hold ourselves in high esteem, when we trust and respect and honor ourselves, when we are gentle, forgiving, and compassionate with our faults and our mistakes, when we release expectations and judgment of ourselves and love ourselves unconditionally, and I was not there, but I am there now because of what God's done in my heart to ground me in my identity, then we can extend the same to others. But I believe, and my experience has shown me, the reverse is true as well. So when we are experiencing insecurity, a feeling of unworthiness, a lack of love for ourselves, it's often stemming from judgment on ourselves that we're falling short of a standard we hold. So a standard is the way in which we measure ourselves. So that mom who's wanting her house to be perfect because she's getting company, she's developed a standard by which she's measuring herself, saying everything's got to be completely tidy, cleaned up, pristine, and perfect. Now she's typically made that up, as most of our standards are by which we measure ourselves. But the standards tell us how to act, what to wear. Ooh, that's not good. It's a good thing I'm forgiving and compassionate towards my own faults, right? Okay, what to wear, what to say, living under shoulds and have-tos. So the measure that we use has to be the measure that we use for ourselves, has to be the measure that we use for other people. And it's usually performance-based. If you're in a performance-based measurement where you have all these standards by which you have to live, and typically the standards are way higher than anything that you could ever achieve, you're going to apply that unconsciously to everybody else. So if you have a standard that says you have to be 15 minutes early for an appointment, or that's bad, and you're working with someone or you're dealing with someone or meeting someone who doesn't have that same standard, you're going to be ticked off. You're not going to, in that moment, have harmony. But this, as you know, has become my trademark. But if instead you focus on your beingness, that being on time, or having a perfect house, or putting on a great spread and not burning the food, or whatever, has nothing to do with my core value, that I'm a diamond at the core, regardless of what I do, then you're going to look at other people and you're going to say, you're a diamond, and you're a diamond, and you're a diamond. And their behaviors, whether they're on time or not, don't have to tick you off, because you're in a better place of accepting them. So you let go of the standard of measurement and you accept people for who they are. That's a place of understanding and harmony. So think about the people that really annoy you. If you're coming from a place of wanting harmony with them, your first task, if you will, is going to be to try and understand them. Oh, I understand him all right. He's a jerk that just wants to show everybody else how crummy they are. That is sort of the top level. But when we talk about understanding, we're talking about why. Asking the 5 whys and getting down to the root level. Why does that person treat other people like they're dirt? Not because they're jerks. They act like they're jerks, but they're like this. They're one of these. At the heart, they are one of these. They're not jerks at the heart. Something has happened somewhere in their lives. Everybody's got a story that has shaped their thinking, that has established their measurement system by which they are judging themselves and others. So when you shift from performance to this, you start to be hungry to know, what's your story? Why are you acting like that? It starts to become more natural to want to know what's going on the inside. Because I know you're one of these. I know that you are a diamond. You're not acting like who you are. And I want to know why. And it allows you to come from a place of greater understanding and love. Because you're not loving their behaviors. Nobody wants to be treated like dirt. But it doesn't have to get inside you. You can brush it off because you know that's not true anyway. That's just the way they see it. And they're seeing it that way because of their own story, their own experience. So if you can get past that, and I found this to be true time and time and time again, people that I have been warned against at work, when I approach them from the standpoint of they are a diamond, and I don't let their brusqueness or abruptness or whatever their attitude is that turns everybody off, when I don't let that get inside me, we start to become actually really good friends. There's a woman I'm currently working at the University of Guelph, and there's a lady there, one of the directors, that everybody is intimidated by because she's loud and outspoken and direct, and she swears a lot, and she'll swear at you, and she's just one of these people that people find hard to, not even love, hard to like. And I did some work with her a number of years ago when I was there in 2012, and God had already been working inside me, so I was able just to kind of let a lot of that stuff go, and we ended up forming actually a good relationship. So when I went back to Guelph a couple of weeks ago, she was coming, there was a woman kind of showing me around, introducing me to all the new faces. And this director was coming in the opposite direction. And when she saw me, her entire face lit up. She rushed over to me, gave me a great big hug, and went, "Oh, it's so good to see you again." And the woman who was giving me the tour, her jaw hit the ground, because she has never seen that side of this director before. You could almost see the wheels turning, going, oh my gosh, this woman this director is actually human. But I wasn't intimidated by the external because God had already planted it deep in my heart. I'm a diamond, and so is she, and those behaviors don't define who she is. And so we've been able to enjoy a harmony that she doesn't enjoy with too many other people because they're too intimidated by this very domineering kind of approach. So together, she and I can laugh about her directness and bluntness. I can tease her about it and try and gently offer maybe an alternative way to deal with people, because she's allowed me that place in her life. So if I was still back in the insecurity defined by my performance, I would not have had that kind of reception. I can guarantee you that. So it's your measure, your standard of measure by which you apply it to yourself and then apply it to other people. So when we don't love ourselves, even if you're still not agreeing with me, I think this is true. It's much harder to accept others, to be patient and not judge them. It's much harder to think the best of them and forgive them and not be offended or hurt, and to love them unconditionally. It's also much more difficult then to live in harmony and deal with conflict, because if we don't love ourselves, if we're not grounded in who we are and that we are just as worthy and valuable as everyone else, when a conflict comes, we're not going to advocate for ourselves. So I'm going to introduce you just a little bit to conflict theory. That's what I do. I'm a coach by profession, and this is one of the tools that I use. But hopefully you'll find it helpful. So a number of years ago, some very smart people down at Harvard came up with a theory to talk about how people deal with conflict. And they categorized them into 5 different conflict styles, put on a dimension of how much concern people have for what's important to others, and how much they're concerned about what is important to themselves. So from a low to a high concern about what's important to others, low to a high concern about what's important to other people. So if a person has little concern for what's important to others, truly important, and they're also not really concerned about what's important to them to the extent that they're willing to let it go, they will tend to use an avoiding style of conflict. Even if the issue is important, it's not important enough to them to do something about it. And many people live here most of the time, hoping that the conflict will resolve itself, either afraid of being judged because their measurement system says, I'm going to be judged if I don't act properly, or whatever their standards say. And so while they may be concerned about what's important to them, they're not concerned enough to deal with what they perceive as very uncomfortable to them. And they're also not seeing the importance to the other person. And so they're willing to go along with the baggage, with the unresolved issues, with the festering issues for a long time. There are certainly times when it's important to avoid conflict. If someone pulls a knife on you, that's not the time to try and negotiate. So it's a style that you use, but many people default to it all the time. People who solely have a high focus on the importance of whatever the issue is to them and no regard for what's important to others, those are the people that enter into a conflict and step all over people, typically. They're the ones that are out to get their way, and that's typically why we avoid conflict, because we don't want to be seen like one of those. This is turtle, this is a shark. We don't want to be seen as a shark. Again, there may be times where it's important to stand your ground, but not always. If you have a high concern about what's important to others, and you're willing to let go of what's important to you, or it truly isn't important to you, you're going to be using an accommodating style, meaning you're going to accommodate whatever the other person wants. And this was me. Early in our marriage, this was definitely me, either avoiding the conflict entirely, swallowing my frustration or anger, or just like, yeah, sure, whatever you want. But, and again, there are times where that's good. If truly the issue is more important to the other person, and it's not to you, well then accommodate. What I'm getting at is when you're talking about harmony, you don't want to live here all the time. Because basically you're saying, I'm nothing. And what is important to me really isn't as important as what's important to other people. And so you're going to be living in those dimensions too often. Someone who has a moderate concern for what's important to others and a moderate concern for what's important to them come into a conflict with these, you got to give up a little to get a little. It's a compromising kind of approach. And it can be good if you're on polar opposites. However, each side is still losing something. So they're still walking away from the conflict, feeling like they didn't get everything they wanted. Sometimes that's all you can do. And it's better than being at one of the extremes. But I would suggest that collaborating, the conflict style that says, I come into this conflict that we have, this difference, and I am as committed to you getting a win as to me getting a win. We are both going to have a win from this. We're both going to get everything that's important to us. We may have to come up with a totally different option to what I think we need or you think, but we're both coming into this saying, you're going to get what you want, I'm going to get what you want. Because you have a high concern for what's important to them and a high concern for what's important to you. That obviously takes a lot of talking. And that's why a lot of people never make it there. Because it's uncomfortable. Sometimes, if you personalize it, if you've got standards that have to do with performance. But that one will generate a lot, that will actually create harmony, and it will foster your relationship. It'll foster a much higher degree of trust than any of these. This one is the fox, because you're holding your cards close to your chest, you're being sly, you're trying to figure out what the angle is. I mean, think about, and no offense to Rod, but car dealers who are trying to who are trying to sell you the car at as high a cost as possible, and you're trying to get it as low a price as possible, and you come into it with this compromising perspective. Not all car dealers do that. Some of them very much are up there, but many of them come in with that. The collaborating is represented by the owl. Again, that wisdom and understanding for creating harmony. And the accommodating is the teddy bear, because teddy bears are cute and cuddly, and they're soft, and what? They just give constantly, right. Nothing wrong inherently with any of the 5 styles. But if you identify yourself with one of them that you use most often, maybe think about why. Why do you defer to that style? Especially if you're down here, it's going to be really tough for you to live in harmony because you're constantly going to be giving and giving and giving. And over time, that's going to really start to annoy you. Because then it becomes the, what about me? How come I don't get what I want? Come on. Come on, come on. There we go. So, to conclude, I would suggest harmony is not a to-do. When we see the scripture live in harmony, that's not another task that God is putting on our to-do list. I would suggest it's actually a to-be. When you are in harmony with yourself, when you love yourself, when you accept yourself, when you're gracious with your mistakes, then you're able to be in harmony with other people. If you're at conflict with yourself because you don't like yourself much, it's going to be really hard to enjoy true harmony. So recognize that people are different, but they're all of equal value. So, like I said, the Father's not commanding us to live in harmony. I see it as He's inviting us to enjoy the experience that He is living for eternity, that perichoresis, that harmony, that face-to-face relationship that He enjoys in the Trinity, that dance of life. So the fellowship, this is how perichoresis is defined, the fellowship of 3 co-equal beings perfectly embraced in love and harmony. That was the actual definition. And that, I think, is what we're all being invited to enjoy with Him. Thank you very much.